حي على الفلاح.
And this is 1137. Salahuddin al-Ayyubi is born. They described him, he was someone who loved the hearing of hadith. He had a soft heart and he would cry often when hadith were narrated. That most of the times when he was free doing nothing, he would sit with his family. Christian chronicler William of Tyre, he said, any ascendancy in the power of Salahuddin was a cause of suspicion in our eyes, for he was a man who was valiant in war, brave, wise in counsel, and generous beyond measure. He would say things like, how can this enjoyment and good food make me happy and pleased when Jerusalem is in the hands of the Crusaders? Just like Nuruddin rahimahullah had a focus, 3-point plan: Jerusalem, unification, and defeat of the Fatimids. Salahuddin had the same. Sultan Salahuddin, the man who unified the Ummah, recaptured Jerusalem, hero of Islam. It was now in the 1180s, 1185, 86, there was a truce between Salahuddin and a man called Raymond of Tripoli, who was one of the head of the Crusaders. But that truce was running out. Salahuddin, just before that, he had two catastrophic moments in his life. One was an illness. He had two major illnesses in his life, and both were life-threatening. And this an illness, they thought he was going to die, but he recovered from it. But then just as he recovered, his wife Ismat ad-Din dies. And they kept that information from Salahuddin because they knew that if he knew that information, he might just lose all hope, resolve, and say, you know what, pack your bags. And so they kept that information from him, at least for the time being. The truce between Raymond of Tripoli and Salahuddin was coming to an end. Salahuddin, he had good reason not to renew the truce, or for a few reasons. There was a man called Reynaud de Chatillon. Reynaud de Chatillon was the prince of Karak. He was someone who the Muslims imprisoned because he was a fitna maker, was doing crazy things, pillaging and plundering, and they imprisoned him. But then he was released. And when he was released, what did he do? There was a link between Karak. What he did is he plundered a caravan en route, and he took the possessions and he harmed the men and he stole the money, and this was a violation of the truce. Now we must be fair to say that the Crusaders in Jerusalem did not like Reynaud de Chatillon. They didn't even agree with what he did. But the fact was that he was one of their own. He was still a Crusader and they were all Crusaders. And so then they needed to cover him up. But Salahuddin then, because of what he did, he had good reason not to renew the truce. Number two, his armies were so large and speaking all different languages: Arabic, Kurdish, Turkish, all different languages from all parts of the Muslim world. Badruddin Dildrim, Qaymuz al-Najmi, Fakhruddin al-Zafarani, these three generals of his army in three different distinct places in Balad al-Sham that he could call at any moment. And he called all of them. Badruddin Dildrim, Qaymuz al-Najmi, Fakhruddin al-Zafarani. And the idea, let's set out for Tiberias. Now this was very, very clever on behalf of Salahuddin, because Raymond of Tripoli, his wife was in Tiberias. And so when he said, let's set out for Tiberias, Raymond thought he's going to go and attack his wife, but no, it was bait. Let's just go there and we'll bring the Crusaders all there, and we're in a much stronger position. We have much bigger army, stronger army, we're fit, we're healthy. And if they were to come to Tiberias, they would have to travel from very far, and it's very hot, and they'll get very thirsty. And they'll die on the way. If they don't die on the way, they get too tired to fight. So what happens is that they all head for Tiberias. Even though Raymond was advising the king of Jerusalem, Guy de Lusignan, that this is bait, They didn't believe him. They all went to Tiberias. Now it's very hot. One of the first things Salahuddin does is he ignites fire scrubs, because he knew that the westerly wind would blow in the direction of the Crusaders. And the wind, the smoke, the ashes is blowing in the direction of the Crusaders. Not only are they so fatigued and so tired and so thirsty, but now they're kind of in this conundrum situation because the fire scrubs. Salahuddin, his army was very strong. What ensued then was a battle in the year 1187 called the Battle of Hattin. Ibn al-Athir rahimahullah says after the great early battles in Islam, there was no battle that was greater for the Muslims than this battle. This was a decisive battle between the Crusaders and the Muslims. This was a time where the Crusaders had a relic called the True Cross. Early on in the First Crusade, there was also a Second Crusade by the way, they believed they'd found, based upon a dream someone had, the cross that they believed falsely Jesus was crucified upon, a false belief, but they believed they had a part of it. And so they believed if they took this with them in the battle, God would give them victory. And they had it with them. And there were knights called the Knights Templars, who were a military order. Two military orders, the Hospitallers and the Knights Templars, and these were monks who were not even allowed to wear like colorful clothing. And they had to eat bread and drink water and live in monasteries. And they were the most excelled in warfare. And there were hundreds of them there participating in the Battle of Hattin. Salahuddin knew that you can never take the Knights Templars as prisoners of war, because if they lived, they would cause the most damage to the Muslim world. And so the Knights Templars are there guarding the bishops of Lidda, are guarding the true cross with their life, because they have to make sure that that remains. Salahuddin knows this, and so he sends a large reinforcement of people go and fight there, the bishops of Lidda who are guarding the true cross. Because if we get that in our hands, all their morale would sink. They would feel as if there's no purpose to fight because God is now not happy with them. The Muslims had a much larger army. All these three generals came along. They all fought. The Crusaders are weak, fatigued, thirsty, and they all have the smoke and the ashes in their faces, and it was a disaster for them, and it was a magnificent victory for the Muslimin. The Battle of Hattin. In the Battle of Hattin, my dear brothers, who was there? The King of Jerusalem, Guidi Lusignan. This shaitan, Reynold de Chatillon, he was there. 230 Knights Templars were participant in that. Raymond of Tripoli, all the heads of the Crusaders were there, and they were all either killed or captured. Magnificent victory. And they were all there. One of the beautiful anecdotes that Al-Isfahani writes in his chronicle, he says there was an old man who took part in the battle. And when the battle was won, because he had to have some ghanima, some spoils of war, because he took part in the battle, and so they gave him a frank soldier. He could be like a servant for him, he could be someone to plow the fields. Strong, big frank for him. What does the old man do? He says to the people, exchange this franc for me for a pair of sandals. And they said, come on, maybe you're losing your mind. He says, I want those who come after me, like us today, to read that these Crusaders were so insignificant and worthless and cheap in the eyes of the Muslims, that an old man once sold one of them for a pair of sandals. That's empowerment. What happened in Salahuddin when all the prisoners were there? King of Jerusalem, Reynold de Chatillon, Raymond of Tripoli, all of these are there. Salahuddin, he approaches the King of Jerusalem. This is king and king, And he invites Guidi Lusignan to Islam. But he doesn't accept Islam. In any case, he gave him some water to drink. After a hot day of fighting, have the water to drink. He drank from the water. Beside him was the shaitan, Reynold de Chatillon, and he gives the cup of water to drink to Reynold the Shuttle, and he says, you have a sip of water. And then he began to gulp and gulp and gulp from the water. Salahuddin then speaks and says, in our custom, kings don't kill kings. And nor do we kill the one that we've just given water to. You gave him the water to drink. He invites Reynold the Shuttle onto Islam. Accept Allah, your life is saved. No, arrogance, pride, arrogance, pride, no. And so he takes his scimitar and he separates his arm from the shoulder, and then he pushes him towards the others, and they execute him. And then the king of Jerusalem sent into exile. It was a magnificent victory for the Muslims. What's left then? Jerusalem, but also the Crusader states. And Salahuddin is left in this predicament. What does he do first? Try and take the coastline of Sham or Jerusalem? The heart is saying Jerusalem, but in essence the mind would have been the Crusader states, because if you don't take them, you always leave an avenue open for the Crusaders to launch another attack against you. In any case, he went for Jerusalem. Now look at this, what happened in Jerusalem. Jerusalem has no king, because the king now is captured and taken into exile. A man called Balian of Ibelin, who fought in the Battle of Hattin but he escaped, was riding back to Jerusalem because he knew that Jerusalem is next. In Jerusalem is his wife Maria Komnena and her children. And what he wants to do is enter Jerusalem, take his wife and her kids out of Jerusalem, and then just go and live a life somewhere else. And the crusade business is finished for him. But he needs guarantee from Salahuddin that this could happen. He sends a letter or a detachment, something to Salahuddin asking for permission. Salahuddin agrees. He says, I give you permission on one condition: you don't ever raise up arms against me. Never pick up the sword against me ever again. I will let you and your wife and her kids leave Jerusalem. He says, perfect, perfect, perfect. He gets to Jerusalem. What happens? The patriarch of Jerusalem petitions Balian of Ibelin and says, look, now we have no king of Jerusalem. You are going to be the de facto ruler, king of Jerusalem. You're going to defend this city. He says, no, I have a deal, a contract with Salahuddin. I would never raise up arms against him. I'm going to take my wife and kids out of this country. Thank you very much. He says, what are you talking about? He says, all the deals, contracts you make with the disbelievers, meaning the Muslims, they don't count for anything. They're not even valid in our religion. So don't have to worry about that anymore. Don't worry about not taking arms against anybody. He's stuck. So he has to defend Jerusalem, but he still has the issue with his wife and her kids. He sends another letter to Salahuddin and says, look, I can't keep the deal with you anymore. I'm going to defend the city of Jerusalem, but I'm still going to ask you, can my wife Maria Komnena and her kids leave Jerusalem? What do you think Salahuddin says? He says yes. But not only does he say, yes, they can leave, women and children is not our affair, my dear brothers. Wallahi, women and children are not our affair. We do not target women or children in anything. He says they can leave. Well, not only that, when they're leaving Jerusalem, he showers them with gifts, clothing and gifts and toys and clothing, to show this is our deen, my dear brothers. We will defend, we will fight to retake Jerusalem. That is our haqq, our right. But we will not exceed evil things you did to us in 1095 when you took Jerusalem from us. Ibn al-Athir rahimahullah says when they took Jerusalem in 1095, up to 70,000 Muslims were killed in that city. Except the farmers they needed, because they didn't know how to, agriculture for the land. They had to keep them alive so that they could work the land, the fields for them. But it wasn't the same. When he arrived at Jerusalem, the siege didn't last. There was a breach in the wall, and then Balian comes out and he knows that he has to make terms with Salahuddin. And the terms were this, that they have to pay a ransom, 10 dinars for a man and 5 for a woman, and then 2 or 1 for a child. There were thousands who could not afford to pay the ransom, and Salahuddin allowed them to leave Jerusalem free of charge. Just to exemplify the mercy of what Islam represents, that we fought you to retake this city, but we're not going to be cruel to you. You know, there's accounts, for example, where when they were leaving Jerusalem, the Patriarch of Jerusalem is leaving with gold plates and rugs worth so much money. And they say to Salahuddin, look, why don't we keep these things here? We didn't say to them to leave with all of the gold and the rugs. That wasn't part of the deal. They had to just leave paying the ransom. Why? Salahuddin said no. He said, let them go with their things. I don't want, when they set foot back in Western Europe, to say that we did not observe the letters of the treaty. It's better that they just leave and don't trouble us again, and that we have Jerusalem, the land of Quds. We have this land, the sanctity of Allah, we have this back with us. When the Crusaders were leaving, the old men were walking, toiling out of the city. They've lived there for generations now, 88 odd years, long time. And the squires, nobility, are leaving Jerusalem with their fine horses. And they tell Salahuddin, look at this, what they're doing. You know what he says? He says, go to them, pull down these squires and nobility off the horses, and these old men, put them on the horses, and make the squires and nobility walk behind them. What business, my dear brothers? Ethics. At least when they go back to Western Europe, they can say, we learned some good manners from the Muslims. And then they leave Jerusalem. But there was a treaty that was signed, that the pilgrims were allowed back into Jerusalem to worship in peace, just like before. They would keep, if I remember, Jaffa and Tyre, they would keep these two. And the Muslims have Jerusalem. And then began the process of cleaning Jerusalem. And so they would perfume the floors. Nuruddin, I will tell you this, and before he died, he made a minbar. And he had like this ambition. He says, inshallah, when we recapture Jerusalem, we will install this minbar in Aqsa. Now he died in 1174, and this is now 1187, so that's 13 years difference. Salahuddin, this was by the way in Aleppo. They kept the minbar in Aleppo, Halab. He said, go to Aleppo and bring the minbar of Nuruddin, and we will install it in Aqsa. And then there was competition about who would be the first khatib in Aqsa. After all these years, there was a competition. You know, Muhyiddin ibn al-Zaki, he won. Muhyiddin ibn al-Zaki was the first khatib in the first Jummah after the reconquest of Jerusalem. I will tell you this, in the Dome of the Rock, there was a plan that they had to have Quranic inscriptions around the Dome of the Rock. And so they had to decide, okay, which ayat of the Quran would you have around the Dome of the Rock? You know what they settled on? They settled on the first 21 ayat of Surah Taha in the Quran. Because it's in these 21 ayat about Musa alayhi salam and Fir'aun, and also when Allah is asking, وَمَا تِلْكَ بِيَمِينِكَ يَا Musa, what's in your right hand, or Musa, it's a stick. Allah says, throw down the stick. What happens? It becomes like a serpent. He becomes scared. Allah says, come back, don't be scared. We will سَنُعِيدُهَا سِيرَتَهَا الْأُولَى. This is ayah 21. Allah says, we will turn this snake back into its original state again. And there is symbolism attached to this, in that they wanted the Muslims to always remember, even though Quds was taken for 88 years, سَنُعِيدُهَا سِيرَتَهَا الْأُولَى. Allah. You know, just like the stick of Musa alayhi salam, Allah reverted it back to its original state. Likewise, Quds came back to its original state. And like that, Quds will come back to its original state, my dear brothers. And so you have faith, and you have hope. And there is effort and there is work. May Allah help the Muslims of Palestine. May Allah aid them. And may we be of those who aid them. Salahuddin in 1192 became extremely ill. They would say things like, like when it was winter, he would not wear his big coat. They thought he was losing his mind. So there was a time then he became bedridden. This is 1193 now, bedridden. And the Qur'an, the reciters of Qur'an would come and they would recite Qur'an, and others would come and recite Qur'an again all day, all night, One thing I want to mention here at the end. Salahuddin, he had a son called Al-Zahir, his son. His son was leaving out of Damascus. By the way, Salahuddin, he resettled in Damascus. He loved the city of Damascus more than any other place, Damascus. That was the land of his upbringing. May Allah bless the land of Damascus. So this was in Damascus now, and the reciters are coming. His son was leaving. He comes back and he says, I'm going to pay a last visit to my father. This is the advice, my dear brothers. This is of a dying man. This is a dying man, a dying father's advice to his son. Sultan, he was Sultan, Salahuddin, the man who unified the Ummah, recaptured Jerusalem, hero of Islam. This is his dying advice to his son, my dear brothers. He said to his son, I instruct you with the taqwa of Allah, because that is the head of all the issues, all the affairs. Sabab najatik, that is the means of your salvation. And I instruct you to look after the affairs of your subjects, your people. Because I have not achieved what I have achieved in my life except by being good to people. Allahu Akbar. Salahuddin is saying this. I warn you against spilling blood, because blood doesn't sleep. There is always revenge, retaliation and revenge, and retaliation and revenge, and there's no peace. He said, don't bear grudges against anybody, because death spares nobody. Salahuddin had 16 children, my dear brothers. But they realized, whilst having 16 children, responsibility for the Ummah. And then one particular night, they realized how bad he was, and the reciter was reciting from the Quran. And he was reciting, Huwallahu alladhi la ilaha illa hu. And he came, and his last words that they had was from him was Sahih. Sahih. He said, it's true. And then he died in that state. Everybody will die. Everyone will die. And it is not about what we leave behind today, because Salahuddin, what did he leave behind? That they didn't find in his treasury enough money to bury him. They didn't have money for the shroud that came from Al-Qadi Al-Fadil, gave them money for the shroud. They did not have enough money for the straw to line his tomb. That money was provided for. He left in his treasury 1 dinar and 47 dirham. The man who took the palace from the Fatimid Khalif. They said, we just saw gold everywhere. But he took nothing for himself. A man who recaptured Jerusalem but took nothing for himself. That's not what we take with us in the next life, my dear brothers and sisters in Islam, no. And so he realized then it was about his deeds. May Allah have mercy on Salahuddin.